She thought she was just helping a stranger with a broken car, but when he saw the ring on her finger, his entire world unraveled. What began on a rainy roadside turned into a journey of buried love, second chances, and a truth that would reshape everything. This isn't just a story about repair, it's about redemption. And it all started with one act of kindness. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drenching the empty Georgia highway, where cars sped past indifferent to the man in a tailored suit standing beside a broken-down BMW. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his hair slicked to his face, and the flashing hazards cast strange shadows across the road. From the opposite direction, a faded Toyota Corolla rolled to a stop. The engine coughed once before going silent. The door opened and a woman stepped out, dark-skinned, eyes sharp, her jacket thrifted, her boots worn thin. In the back seat, a little boy lay sleeping under a frayed blanket, his breath fogging the window. "Need help?" she asked, already approaching. The man blinked. He didn't expect anyone to stop, especially not a woman like her. "My car's dead. Maybe the battery," he mumbled. She popped her hood, fished out cables from the trunk, and within minutes the BMW engine roared back to life. "Thank you, really," he said, but mid-sentence his words stopped. She brushed damp curls from her face. On her left hand, a silver ring with a deep blue sapphire shimmered. The man froze. His voice dropped. "Where did you get that ring?" The air thickened. Something long buried had just risen. Her name was Amira. Just a mechanic, just a single mother trying to make ends meet. She'd been heading home after finishing a side job installing a radiator in a neighbor's garage. She didn't expect her kindness to be questioned. But when the man Julian saw the ring on her finger, his whole demeanor changed. The storm outside seemed to pale in comparison to the storm building in his eyes. "That ring," he said barely above a whisper, "it belonged to someone I lost." Amira narrowed her eyes. "It was my mother's. Before she died." Julian's breath hitched. "Her name, was it Danya?" Amira took a step back, shaken. "How do you know that name?" He pressed a hand over his mouth like holding back time itself. "Because I gave that ring to her. 22 years ago, under an oak tree behind the orphanage. I told her I'd come back." Amira stared at him, disbelief churning in her chest. "My mother wore this ring until the day she died," she said, voice trembling. "She never took it off." Julian's eyes glistened. Then she waited. Even if I didn't deserve it, she waited. They sat in silence inside a tiny roadside diner. Rain tapped the windows like ghosts trying to get in. Julian stirred his coffee endlessly, while Amira sat across from him, arms crossed, lips tight. "She never told me about you," Amira said finally. "Only once. Just your name." "Julian." "And that you disappeared," he nodded slowly. "Because I did. I let my parents convince me she wasn't right for me, that love was disposable." Amira's jaw clenched. She wasn't disposable. She raised me on nothing. She fixed engines with her bare hands. She taught me never to expect anything from anyone. "I know," Julian whispered. "I can't take that pain back. But I can face it." "Why now?" she asked, eyes burning. "After all these years, why now?" Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter worn folded at the edges. "Because I finally read this." Amira unfolded it, her mother's handwriting unmistakable. "If you ever find Julian, tell him I forgave him the day he left." Amira bit her lip. The tears came hot and unrelenting. This wasn't just about a ring anymore. This was about a wound still healing and a past refusing to stay buried. Back at her small apartment, Amira stood by the window watching the rain blur the city lights. Her son Kaden slept peacefully on the couch, unaware that the man who helped fix their car had once broken her mother's heart. Julian sat across from her, shoulders hunched, soaked to the bone in remorse. "I don't want pity," she said, not turning around. "And I definitely don't want guilt. I didn't come here for either." He replied, "I came because when I saw you, I saw her. And when I saw that ring, I knew I couldn't run anymore." She finally turned to him. "You left her when she needed you most. She waited. Alone. She died thinking love was a one-way road." Julian looked down. "And I've lived every day since thinking the same. Until today." He glanced toward the sleeping boy. "Is he?" "No." Amira cut in. "Not yours. That part of the story belongs to someone else who also left." Julian swallowed hard. "Then maybe I could be someone who stays." Amira didn't answer, but the silence wasn't angry this time. It was open, and that was more than he had expected. Days passed. Julian came by again and again, not with grand gestures, but with groceries, jumper cables, and quiet words. Kaden took to him quickly, perhaps sensing something no adult could name. One night while reading a bedtime story, Kaden asked, "Will, you come back tomorrow?" Julian hesitated, then smiled. "If your mom lets me, I'll be here. Every day." Amira stood at the door, arms crossed, watching him. The memory of her mother's silent sacrifices pressed heavy on her chest. She remembered the nights Danya cried, thinking Amira didn't hear. Later, when Julian was about to leave, he placed a small box on the kitchen counter. "I don't want to fix the past," he said. "I want to build something from it." Inside was a proposal funding to open Amira's own auto shop, a chance to stop patching cars in strangers' driveways and finally claim her worth. She stared at the papers. "This isn't charity," he said gently. "This is a long overdue promise." Amira didn't speak. She only looked at her mother's ring, and for the first time saw it not as a reminder of pain, but as the seed of something new. That night, Amira couldn't sleep. The trust proposal sat untouched on the table like a weight of unspoken truth. Her mother had never asked for anything, only given. And now the man who had once taken everything from her offered something back. But could it really undo the years? She walked to the workshop behind her building, the place where she fixed cars for neighbors and strangers alike. The air reeked of oil, metal, and memories. She stared at the cracked concrete floor and whispered, "Mama, what would you have done?" In her heart, she heard the answer not in words, but in the steady rhythm of her mother's hands, always working, always hoping. Suddenly, the door creaked. Julian stood there, soaked again from the rain. He didn't speak. He only held up a thermos of hot tea. They sat on a workbench, saying nothing. The silence wasn't heavy, it was healing. "I can't go back," he murmured. "You don't need to," Amira replied, "but you have to move forward with your eyes open." For the first time, they weren't just talking about history. They were building something fragile but real, truth stripped of shame. The next morning, Kaden ran into the living room holding a drawing. "Mommy, look. It's us." Three stick figures stood under a big tree, a woman with curly hair, a little ball, and a man with a blue tie, all of them smiling, holding hands. Amira knelt beside him. "Who's that?" she asked gently, pointing to the man. "That's the man who brings cookies and tea." Kaden grinned. "He stays." Amira's chest tightened. A simple picture, a child's hope. But wasn't that all she had ever wanted for herself? That afternoon, she met Julian outside her building. "I'm not ready to say yes," she said, "but I'm not ready to say no either." He nodded, understanding. "Then I'll wait," just like she did. "No," Amira said, looking him dead in the eye. "Don't wait. Walk forward. Show me you've changed." He swallowed, then reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. "This is for Kaden, a savings account under his name. You don't have to accept me, but he deserves more than I ever gave his grandmother." She took it, her fingers trembling. The past wasn't being erased, but maybe, just maybe, it was beginning to be rewritten. Word traveled fast. The man in the suit who used to drive past the neighborhood now walked its sidewalks. Grocers noticed. The kids whispered. Even the old men at the bus stop nodded. They saw him helping Amira haul parts, fixing a flat with grease on his shirt, not flinching when the buck slipped and smashed his finger. Julian had changed, but Amira still carried her doubts like armor. One evening, as she locked up her workshop, Julian approached her with a surprise. "Come with me," he said. He drove her to a quiet lot downtown, an abandoned garage. The sign was faded, the roof dented, but the space was large. "This," he said, turning to her, "is yours if you want it. I've already bought the deed. Clean title. No strings." Amira's knees almost gave out. "This is too much." "No," Julian said. "This is not enough. But it's a beginning." She looked at him, not the millionaire, but the man who was slowly learning what love required. For the first time, she let herself imagine a future, one where her hands fixed engines, not just to survive, but to build a life of her own design. That night, Amira dreamed of her mother, not as she last saw her, tired and quiet in a hospital bed, but young again, laughing, free, standing under an oak tree holding her daughter's face with grease-stained fingers. When Amira woke, the image stayed. She walked to the mirror and studied her reflection, eyes rimmed with fire hair tied up with quiet strength, and on her finger the sapphire ring still glimmered. That ring had been a promise, then a wound. Now it was becoming something else, a bridge. Later that day, she brought Kaden to the old garage. He ran through the open space, arms stretched wide. Is this ours? Mommy Amira smiled, her eyes soft. If we want it to be. Julian watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, not interfering. When Amira walked up to him, she said, "You're not forgiven." Not yet. He nodded slowly. That's fair. But you're not invisible anymore either. His breath caught. I don't need a partner, she added, but I'll take one if he knows what it means to stay. Julian extended his hand, not to shake, but to hold. Amira hesitated, then took it. The ribbon was simple. No photographers, no grand opening, just Amira, Kaden, and Julian standing under the faded awning of what was now officially Danya's garage, named after the woman who had given her everything. Amira cut the ribbon with her mother's old scissors. Kaden clapped wildly. Julian stood beside them, quiet. Inside, the smell of oil mingled with fresh paint. New tools lined the walls, but the old ones, her mother's wrench, the chipped socket, set still hung proudly above the workbench. As they walked through the shop, Amira paused at a framed photograph Julian had secretly placed on the counter. It was of Danya, young and radiant, holding a baby Amira in one arm and a car manual in the other. Underneath it, a quote, "We fix what others leave broken." Amira's eyes filled. Thank you, she whispered, not just to Julian, but to the woman who taught her resilience without saying the word. Julian stepped forward, pulling something from his coat pocket. A small wooden keychain, hand-carved. I made this, he said. Back then. She never got to see it. Amira turned it over in her hand. A simple heart, carved initials D and J. Finally, healing had a home. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in soft amber, Amira stood at the doorway of her newly named garage, Danya's garage, watching Kaden race his bike up and down the lot, his laughter ringing like bells in the dusk. Julian sat on the steps holding 2 mugs of warm ginger tea. He handed one to her without a word. She took it, their fingers brushing. He smiles more now, Julian said. It's like he feels safe. Amira nodded, eyes still on her son. He never asked where his father was. I think he could feel the silence, a pause. Then Julian's voice low. Do you think he'd ever forgive me? She looked at him long and hard. You weren't the one who left him, but if you want to be someone who stays, you'll have to prove it every single day. Julian nodded. Then I'll start today, and tomorrow, and every day after that. In the distance, Kaden waved at them. Come race me. Julian stood, dusted his jeans. Let's go show him he's not racing alone anymore. And for the first time, Amira didn't just hope, she believed. Maybe healing wasn't a destination. Maybe it was a path they'd walk together. Weeks passed and the garage bloomed with life. Grease-stained hands, late-night repairs, neighbors bringing peace. Kids watching Amira in awe as she changed spark plugs like magic. But something deeper shifted too. Julian didn't just show up, he stayed. He brought business contracts and left them unsigned. He skipped board meetings. He learned how to sweep the shop floor and laughed when the dust made him sneeze. One day, Amira caught him reading an engine manual upside down. She burst into laughter for the first time in months. Wrong way, Professor. He grinned sheepishly. I figured if I want to help, I better learn from the best. And slowly her walls began to soften. That night, they sat under the old tree by the garage, where her mother once parked her first car. Amira pulled a small box from her jacket. Inside, her mother's journal, yellowed pages, faded ink. She wrote about you, Amira said softly. She never stopped believing you'd come back, even when I did. Julian's eyes stung. He touched the journal with reverence. I didn't deserve that hope. Amira whispered, maybe not then, but you're earning it now. And beneath the stars, they kept reading. The following Sunday, Amira found herself in a place she hadn't stepped into in years, the community center. Julian had convinced her to host a free workshop for young women interested in automotive repair. She was skeptical. They won't come, she'd said. But when she opened the doors, a dozen girls were waiting, eyes wide, notebooks in hand. Some wore hijabs, some had pink braids, one had grease already under her fingernails. You don't need strength, Amira began. You need precision and patience, just like life. As she guided them through taking apart a carburetor, a girl whispered, Miss Amira, no one's ever talked to us like this. Later, as the sun dipped, Julian watched her from across the room. She stood tall, not just as a mechanic, but as a teacher, a leader. When the last girl left, Amira wiped her hands, heart full. You did that, Julian said. No, she replied. My mother did. I just finally heard her voice clearly. Julian reached for her hand but didn't push. She let it linger. Sometimes love isn't loud. It's quiet, a space made safe, a silence that finally listens. And in that silence, something whole began to grow. On a rainy Tuesday, Kaden came home from school quiet. He didn't run to his crayons or ask for snacks. He sat on the couch and stared out the window, watching the droplets slide down the glass. Amira sat beside him. What's on your mind, sweet boy? After a pause, he whispered, Do I have a dad now? The question hit her like a soft knife. She looked into his hopeful eyes, then reached for his small hand. You have a man in your life who cares about you deeply. And if you choose to call him Dad one day, that's your decision. Kaden nodded. He helped me with my science project. And he doesn't yell. And he listens. Julian walked in moments later, shaking off his umbrella. What did I miss? Kaden ran to him and hugged his waist tight. Julian froze, then slowly he hugged him back. Tears filled Amira's eyes. Julian looked over at her. Did I do something right? She smiled, voice thick. You showed up. That's more than most ever do. And in that small living room, a new kind of family took its first breath. Spring arrived with color. Flowers bloomed on the cracked sidewalks of their neighborhood, and with it came a chance Amira never expected. A local news channel wanted to feature Danya's garage, a story about a single mother teaching girls how to fix cars in a shop named after her mother. Amira was hesitant. I'm not some kind of hero. But Julian touched her shoulder. You are. You just don't wear a cape. On the day of filming, the shop was buzzing. Reporters, lights, smiling neighbors. Amira stood at the workbench, camera pointed her way. What keeps you going? The journalist asked. She looked at the wall, at her mother's wrench, the photo, the carved keychain. My mother, and now my son, and maybe hope. Even when the world says you're forgotten, you can choose to be remembered. When the segment aired that night, the community flooded the shop with flowers and letters. One simply read, You gave us back our dignity. That evening, Amira and Julian stood outside the shop as twilight settled. I'm not used to attention, she said. He smiled. Get used to impact. And under the warm streetlight, they didn't kiss. They simply stayed. Together. That night, Amira sat alone in her room, holding the sapphire pendant that once belonged to her mother. She gently ran her fingers over its cool surface, as if hoping it could whisper back the memories time had stolen. The house was quiet, Kaden asleep. Julian gone to buy groceries, but her heart was anything but still. She thought about everything that had happened. The roadside meeting, the ring, the revelation. What were the odds that a stranger, a man her mother once loved, would find his way back through her daughter? Was it fate, a second chance, or something even bigger? An unseen promise kept across time and silence. Suddenly a voice came from the hallway. Mama, it was Kaden, sleepy, holding his stuffed dinosaur. Can I sleep in your bed tonight? She opened her arms and he climbed in, curling close. As she wrapped her arms around him, the pendant rested between them, its soft glow catching the moonlight. And in that quiet moment, Amira realized love wasn't about fixing the past. It was about showing up again and again in the present, even if your heart was still learning how to stay open. The next day brought a letter. It was hand-delivered by an assistant in a suit with a gold seal on the envelope. Amira almost didn't open it. Inside it was a formal invitation. The Langston Foundation. Julian's family legacy was opening a new grant program for women in trades, and they wanted to name it the Amira Initiative. She froze, her fingers trembled. She hadn't asked for this, didn't expect it. Part of her wanted to crumple it and toss it away. She was just a mechanic, a mother, a woman who had learned survival through scraped knuckles and broken dreams. But as she stared at the bold black letters, another part of her stirred, one that remembered being a girl watching her mother work until midnight, grease on her cheek, pride in her eyes. Amira picked up her phone and dialed Julian. This is too much, she said. Too big. He paused on the other end. Then let's build something that fits you, not your fear. Amira exhaled. She wasn't afraid of falling anymore. She was afraid of being seen and not believing she deserved it. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. Julian showed up that evening with a box. No words, just that same calm presence that had become his quiet promise. Inside the box were old photographs, faded folded, some nearly torn. "I found these in my father's attic," he said softly. "She saved them. Your mom." Amira's breath caught. There she was, Janine, laughing in the sun arms around a young Julian. Another photo showed her holding a tiny Amira in her arms. Julian knelt beside her. "She loved you more than the world. She told me once she was afraid of breaking your future if she stayed in mine." Tears spilled down Amira's cheeks as she looked through the pieces of a story she never knew she had. "She was radiant," Julian whispered. "She was fierce," Amira corrected gently. They sat on the floor until midnight, memories spilling like stardust between them. "I wish I had been braver," Julian said. "You're here now," she replied, "and that's the only kind of brave that matters." Outside it began to rain, but inside that small living room they were building something that even time couldn't wash away: truth, love, and the chance to begin again. 2 weeks later, the foundation's launch day arrived. Amira stood backstage, heart pounding. The room was packed: women from across the state, local reporters, even schoolgirls in matching jackets. Julian took her hand. "If you want me to speak for you, I can." She shook her head. "No, I have to say it myself, for her." When she stepped up to the microphone, the applause startled her. She took a breath. "I'm not here because I'm extraordinary," she began. "I'm here because my mother loved fiercely, and because a man who once left came back and stayed." The room stilled. "I've spent years fixing engines, but the hardest thing I've ever had to fix was my own belief that I mattered." She looked out at the young women watching her, their eyes wide. "This isn't about charity. It's about recognition. We've always been enough. We just weren't seen." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was thunderous. Backstage, Julian pulled her into a tight hug. "You were brilliant," he whispered. She smiled against his chest. "No," she said. "I was honest. That's more powerful." That night back at the garage, Amira found Kaden asleep under the workbench, hugging a tiny toolbox she had given him. She scooped him up gently, tucked him into bed, and sat beside him. In the soft glow of the lamp, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The girl who once believed she had to carry the world alone had made it. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because she had transformed it into purpose. Julian joined her on the porch, 2 mugs in hand. "To new chapters," he said. "To unfinished ones," she replied. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small box. Inside, not a diamond, but a ring, silver, simple, with an engraving, "Still here." Her hands trembled. "I don't need an answer," he said, "but I wanted you to have something that says I'm not leaving." Amira stared at it. This wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the continuation of one that had survived grief, time, and silence. She took his hand, no words. The ring stayed in the box for now. But her heart, it had already said yes. The following weekend, Amira took Kaden to visit her mother's old hometown. It was the first time she'd returned since Janine's funeral. The streets looked smaller than she remembered, but the memories felt bigger, bolder, louder, raw. She stopped in front of the little white house with peeling paint and a rusted fence. Janine had once called it her dream. Kaden tugged her hand. "Is this where Grandma used to sing to you?" Amira smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, right on that porch." She sat on the front steps, Kaden curled beside her, the breeze gently lifting her braids. In her lap was a letter one she had written to her mother that morning. "I forgive you, Mama," she whispered into the air, "for what you couldn't change, for what I didn't understand until I became a mother too." She placed the letter beneath a stone at the base of the porch. It wasn't about letting go, it was about making peace. And in the rustling trees above and the hush of afternoon stillness, she swore she heard Janine's voice again. Not in grief, but in grace. "I'm proud of you, baby girl." Back in the city, things began to bloom. The grant from the Amira initiative brought in dozens of applicants, women with stories like hers, girls with calloused hands and fire in their eyes. Every morning, Amira opened the doors of her new auto shop, Second Gear, with pride. It wasn't just a business. It was a home for second chances. Julian visited, often never asking for more than she could give. Sometimes he brought Kaden little tools to play with. Sometimes he just sat in the corner, watching her work, awe written across his face. "You belong here," he told her once. She wiped sweat from her brow and smiled. "I built this with grief and a socket wrench." "Of course I belong." One afternoon, she found a note in the toolbox. Love doesn't fix the past, but it gives the future somewhere to grow. No signature, but she knew it was him. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her back pocket. Some promises don't need to be spoken. They're written in effort, in presence, in quiet kindness. And that was what Julian had become quietly, slowly, deeply hers. Months passed and the shop flourished. On a rainy Tuesday, a young woman named Nyla walked in. She was barely 20, trembling, soaked to the bone, holding a toddler on her hip. "I heard you help women like me," she said softly. Amira didn't hesitate. She took Nyla's child, wrapped him in a towel, and made them tea. Later, she handed Nyla a wrench. "Ever fixed a brake pad?" Nyla shook her head. "You will," Amira said. "We learn by doing around here." That day, something shifted. Amira saw herself in Nyla's eyes, and the fear, the exhaustion, the quiet plea to not be dismissed. Julian arrived that evening and watched the scene: Nyla working under the hood, Kaden showing the toddler where the crayons were, Amira laughing for the first time in days. "You've built something beautiful," he said. "No," she replied, brushing her hands on her jeans. "We're building each other." And that was the heart of it. Not charity, not rescue, but restoration. Brick by brick, heart by heart, one story at a time. Winter came with softness. Snow blanketed the city in stillness, but the warmth inside Amira's home never faded. Kaden hung handmade decorations on the walls. Julian cooked awkward pancakes in the morning, burning half but trying anyway. One evening, as they decorated a small tree, Kaden asked, "Mommy, is Julian my family now?" Amira paused the question, cracking something tender inside her. Julian looked up, nervous, waiting. She knelt beside Kaden, brushing his curls. "Family isn't just who's there when you're born, baby, it's who stays." Kaden beamed. Julian exhaled. That night, after tucking Kaden in, Julian stepped onto the porch, snowflakes clinging to his coat. Amira followed. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the box with the silver ring. "It's still here," he said, holding it out. Amira looked at it, then at him. "I'm not promising a perfect story," he said, "but I'll show up for every chapter." She took the ring, slid it onto her finger, and this time she didn't hesitate. "Then let's write it together," she whispered. The snow kept falling, but inside her heart, spring had already begun. 1 year later, the Second Gear shop hosted its first graduation ceremony. Nyla stood at the front, holding her certificate, tears in her eyes. Behind her, 5 other women, all with stories carved from struggle, stood taller than they ever had. Amira watched from the side, hand resting on her now swollen belly. Julian stood behind her, arms loosely around her waist, Kaden holding her hand. This was her family, not defined by blood, but by choice, by love. She took the stage for one final speech. "You all came here thinking you were broken," she said. "But the truth is, you were building yourselves from the ground up. You didn't need saving, you needed space to be seen." She held up her wrench. "This taught me that fixing things isn't about making them perfect. It's about making them whole again." The room erupted in applause. Cameras clicked. But Amira's gaze remained on the women she had walked with through every step. In that moment, she remembered her mother, the sapphire ring still on her finger. She whispered, "We made it, Mama." And in the echo of that joy, through oil-stained floors, second chances, and quiet redemption, a legacy was reborn. Not in riches, but in resilience. Sometimes life gives us broken pieces, not to punish us, but to show us how strong we are when we start putting them back together. Family isn't always about who shares your name, it's about who shows up when it matters. And love, no matter how late it arrives, always finds its way when we lead with grace and courage.